Welcome, friends. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're drifting towards sleep, unwinding after a long day, or simply looking for a quiet companion, you found the right place. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from. Perhaps you're wrapped in a blanket, sitting by a softly lit window, or resting somewhere under an open sky. Wherever you are, I hope you're warm, comfortable, and ready to wander with me into the story of an ancient river that flowed across a lost continent, carrying the memory of deep time in every grain of sediment it touched. If you find peace or curiosity in these gentle stories, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing it with someone who might need a moment of stillness too. And to those who've already joined along, thank you. 1 billion years ago, when Earth spins through space with continents arranged in patterns no modern eye would recognize, a river begins its patient work across the face of a supercontinent called Rodinia. The water moves with the unhurried persistence that only geological time allows, carving channels through rock that remembers when the world was young. This river flows not through familiar landscapes of grass and trees, but across a terrain of naked stone and microbial mats, under skies that hold half the oxygen that fills your lungs tonight. The river's source lies somewhere in what will become the Canadian Shield. Though Canada itself remains a concept locked away in an unimaginable future. Here, in the Mesoproterozoic era, the water gathers from highland regions where ancient mountain ranges rise like the vertebrae of a sleeping giant. These peaks, formed during the Grenville orogeny, stand twice as tall as any mountains on today's Earth, their granite faces unmarked by the softening influence of plant roots or the patient work of lichens that have not yet learned to exist. The headwaters emerge from countless springs that seep through fractured bedrock, each droplet carrying dissolved feldspar and quartz, the molecular memory of continental collision. The water tastes of deep, time metallic, mineral-rich, heavy with the weight of eons. No mouth has ever tasted these waters, for no creature yet possesses the complexity to experience taste, but the river carries its chemical signature like a fingerprint across the continental expanse, marking every stone it touches with the subtle alchemy of its passage. As tributaries converge from the Grenville Highlands, the river grows broader, more purposeful in its westward journey. The landscape it crosses bears no resemblance to any terrain that will exist in the future. Vast plains of basalt stretch toward horizons unbroken by vegetation, their dark surfaces absorbing the alien intensity of the Proterozoic sun. The river cuts through these plains like a silver thread through black cloth, its meandering path dictated by the subtle topography left behind by ancient lava flows and the patient work of thermal expansion and contraction. The river flows westward across Rodinia's vast interior, carrying with it the chemical signature of a world in transition. Each drop holds dissolved minerals that speak to the changing atmosphere above iron oxides that rust in newfound oxygen, sulfur compounds that whisper of volcanic activity along distant margins. The water itself appears rust-colored in the alien sunlight, tinted by iron formations that will one day become the banded iron formations geologists puzzle over in laboratories yet to be built. The river moves like liquid amber through landscapes that know neither shadow nor shade from living things. Along the river's banks, stromatolites build their patient towers layer upon layer of cyanobacteria, creating structures that rise like ancient cathedrals in the shallows. These microbial architects work without consciousness or plan, yet their constructions will outlast mountain ranges. The stromatolites filter the river water, extracting nutrients and releasing oxygen in tiny bubbles that rise toward the surface, like prayers offered to the changing sky. Here, in these quiet margins, Earth conducts its first experiments in cooperative living. Though the concept of cooperation itself awaits the evolution of minds capable of understanding it, the river encounters no obstacles that require engineering, no dams built by creatures that have not yet learned to build. Its path follows the patient logic of gravity and geology, seeking always the lowest route toward the distant ocean. Where harder rocks resist its passage, the river pools and meanders, creating oxbow lakes that glisten like mirrors beneath the ancient sun. These temporary lakes become laboratories for early life, closed systems where chemistry experiments with possibilities that will not bear fruit for hundreds of millions of years. As the river makes its way across this ancient continent, it encounters no bridges, no cities, no evidence of complex life beyond the bacterial communities that form living carpets in its shallows. The silence is profound. No bird song, no insect hum, no rustle of leaves that do not exist. Only the eternal conversation between moving water and yielding stone. The river speaks in a language older than words, carving stories into the landscape that will survive long after the continents themselves have wandered to opposite ends of the earth. The sound it makes, a constant murmur of liquid against mineral, becomes the planet's first sustained music, a melody that plays for millions of years to an audience of stone. Scientists studying the belt supergroup formations in Montana and Idaho find traces of this ancient waterway preserved in stone layers nearly 1 billion years old. The sediments tell stories of seasonal floods, of meandering channels, of deltas that spread like fingers into seas that vanished before complex life learned to dream. Cross-bedded sandstones reveal the direction of ancient currents, while ripple marks frozen in time show where waves lapped against shores that knew no footprints. Only took 1 billion years for these quiet waters to become the object of such careful study. The river's patience, it seems, eventually finds its reward in human curiosity. Yet mysteries remain embedded in the stone record like secrets whispered in an extinct language. Did the river flow year-round, or did Rodinia's climate create seasonal patterns of flood and drought? The sedimentary layers suggest both possibilities, their contradictions preserved in stone like riddles carved by water itself. Geologists debate whether the river system connected to the global ocean Morovia or terminated in vast inland lakes, the evidence supporting multiple interpretations with equal persistence. The ancient river keeps its secrets well, revealing only what time and weathering choose to expose. The river carries more than water and sediment across the supercontinent's face. It transports the building blocks of future oceans, future mountains, future continents that will drift apart and collide in patterns choreographed by forces the river cannot comprehend. Each grain of sand, each dissolved mineral, each bacterial cell carried in its flow becomes part of Earth's long conversation with itself, a dialogue conducted in the patient vocabulary of geological time, where sentences take millions of years to complete and paragraphs span entire eras. As night falls over Rodinia, the river continues its tireless work beneath stars arranged in constellations that would appear alien to modern eyes. The water flows on, indifferent to darkness and light, carrying its burden of dissolved continents toward a destiny written in the deep structure of the planet itself. The ancient river asks nothing of the future, expects nothing from the past, content to fulfill the simple imperative of all flowing water to find the sea, however long the journey, however strange the path. When all the world's land masses gather into a single continent, the planet resembles a vast island floating in an endless sea. Rodinia stretches from the North Pole to the South Pole like a colossal spine of stone and soil, its eastern and western coastlines facing the global ocean that scientists will one day name Merovia, the Mother of Waters. This supercontinent exists in a state of impossible unity, holding within its boundaries all the future continents that will one day scatter across Earth's surface like puzzle pieces flung by an invisible hand. The ancient river begins its journey in the heart of this unified landmass, where no concept of nationality or boundary exists, because no mind yet comprehends such abstractions. The water flows across terrain that contains the seeds of every future landscape, the granite cores that will become the Appalachians, the sedimentary layers that will form the Great Plains, the volcanic rocks that will anchor the Pacific Rim. All of Earth's continental crust gathers here in one massive assemblage, creating weather patterns and climate systems unlike anything the planet will experience again. Rodinia's interior climate differs dramatically from any continental arrangement that follows. The river flows through regions that experience extreme seasonality, where monsoon patterns develop across distances that dwarf modern continents. Summer brings torrential rains that swell the river system to continental proportions, creating temporary lakes the size of small seas. Winter locks much of the supercontinent in ice, reducing the river to a series of disconnected pools connected by underground seepage through frozen ground. The supercontinent's vast size creates its own weather, generating atmospheric circulation patterns that exist on scales impossible in the fragmented world to come. Hot air rises from Rodinia's sun-baked interior and travels thousands of kilometers before cooling and descending, creating wind systems that blow steadily for months across landscapes unmarked by mountain ranges or inland seas. The river follows valleys carved by these ancient winds, its path determined by atmospheric forces that operate on continental scales. Along Rodinia's eastern margin, where the future Atlantic Ocean will one day open, the river system connects to tributary networks that drain highland regions elevated during the supercontinent's assembly. These tributaries carry distinctive mineral signatures: chromium from ultramafic complexes, rare earth elements from granitic intrusions, iron formations from Archean terrains incorporated into Rodinia's growing mass. Each tributary tells the story of continental collision, of ancient island arcs and oceanic plateaus welded together in the slow-motion violence of plate convergence. The western margin presents a different character entirely, where the river approaches the edge of the known world. Here, Rodinia's coast faces the infinite expanse of Merovia, an ocean so vast that no land interrupts its circulation for thousands of kilometers in any direction. The river meets this ocean through delta systems that spread across coastal plains hundreds of kilometers wide, creating wetland environments where early life experiments with multicellularity in tidal pools that experience temperature swings unknown to modern organisms. Strange tides work these ancient shores, driven by lunar forces operating across oceanic basins of unprecedented size. The moon hangs closer to Earth than it will in later eras, creating tidal ranges that expose and flood vast areas of continental margin twice each day. The river's mouth migrates across these tidal flats like a living thing, carving new channels with each spring tide, abandoning old ones to the patient work of sediment deposition and bacterial colonization. Within Rodinia's interior, the river system creates its own microclimate, moderating the extreme conditions that characterize much of the supercontinent. The water retains heat during the long winters and provides evaporative cooling during the scorching summers, creating riparian zones where temperature variations remain within ranges that support diverse microbial communities. These oases of habitability stretch like green threads across landscapes otherwise dominated by extremes of heat and cold. The river carries information across Rodinia's vast distances, transporting chemical signals from one side of the supercontinent to the other. Volcanic eruptions along the eastern margin release sulfur compounds that the river system distributes throughout its watershed, creating temporary acidification events that stress bacterial communities thousands of kilometers from their source. Similarly, periods of enhanced weathering in the Grenville Highlands flood the entire river system with dissolved nutrients, triggering blooms of cyanobacteria that can be traced in sedimentary layers across multiple continents in the world to come. Geological processes operate differently on Rodinia than they will on the fragmented continents that follow. The supercontinent's vast thermal mass creates temperature gradients that drive convection cells in the underlying mantle, generating plume activity that will eventually tear the continent apart. The river system unknowingly flows across the sites of future rifting, its channels following valleys that mark the earliest stages of continental breakup, still hundreds of millions of years in the future. Only took several hundred million years for this unified continent to assemble from scattered terrains and island arcs. The river system that now drains its interior represents the culmination of that assembly process, integrating drainage patterns from formerly separate landmasses into a single vast watershed. The water that flows westward toward Moravia carries the chemical signature of continental unification, a mixture of signatures from cratons formed in different oceans, under different atmospheric conditions, during different epochs of Earth's history. Yet, even as Rodinia reaches its maximum extent, the forces that will dismantle it begin their patient work. Deep within the supercontinent, mantle plumes rise toward the surface, creating thermal domes that will eventually become rifts. The river system flows unknowingly across these future zones of weakness, its drainage patterns soon to be reorganized by the breakup that awaits. Scientists studying the sedimentary record find evidence of this approaching disruption in the river's deposits, subtle changes in mineral composition that reflect the beginning of continental extension. The unity that defines Rodinia carries within it the seeds of its own dissolution. The same forces that assembled the supercontinent from scattered fragments now work to tear it apart, creating the foundation for new oceans, new continents, new river systems that will drain landscapes not yet born. The ancient river flows onward, indifferent to the vast changes brewing beneath its bed, content to follow the eternal imperative of moving water to seek the lowest places, to carry the high places toward the sea, to maintain the patient circulation that keeps the planet's surface renewed and dynamic. As Rodinia rotates through space, carried by the same plate motions that assembled it, the river system experiences the planet's magnetic field in orientations that will never be repeated. The magnetic minerals in its sediments align with field directions that exist nowhere in the modern world, creating paleomagnetic signatures that allow future scientists to track the supercontinent's movement through deep time. The river becomes an unwitting recorder of planetary motion, preserving in its deposits the memory of Rodinia's journey across Earth's surface. The river's first breath emerges from atmospheric patterns that will never again organize themselves in quite the same way. Above Rodinia's vast landmass, air masses circulate in continent-sized gyres, creating monsoon systems that dwarf any weather pattern the fragmented Earth will later experience. The supercontinent's enormous thermal mass drives these atmospheric engines, generating seasonal winds that blow steadily for months across distances measured in thousands of kilometers. During Rodinia's summer, when the supercontinent's interior bakes under the relentless Proterozoic sun, rising air creates a vast low-pressure system that draws moisture from Moravia's infinite expanse. The ocean's surface temperature, unmoderated by continental barriers, supports evaporation rates that feed atmospheric rivers carrying more water vapor than any modern storm system. These aerial streams flow inland from the western coast, following pressure gradients that channel moisture deep into the continental interior. The monsoon's arrival transforms the landscape with sudden violence, Within days, the parched river valleys fill with rushing water that carries the accumulated debris of months of wind erosion. Flash floods carve new channels through sediments baked hard as ceramic, while established waterways overflow their banks to create temporary lakes that stretch beyond the horizon. The river system expands exponentially during these events, connecting normally isolated drainage basins into a single, vast network that spans half the supercontinent. As the moisture-laden air encounters the Grenville Highlands, orographic lifting forces the water vapor upward into the thin atmosphere, where it condenses into storms of extraordinary intensity. These mountain-enhanced precipitation events dump meters of rain in single storms, feeding torrents that cascade down rocky slopes unmarked by vegetation. The runoff carries enormous loads of sediment quartz grains torn from granite faces, feldspar crystals liberated from pegmatite veins, heavy minerals concentrated by the relentless work of gravity and flowing water. The river's chemistry changes dramatically during monsoon seasons, as the massive influx of fresh rainwater dilutes the concentrated mineral solutions that characterize dry season flow. pH levels fluctuate wildly as carbonic acid from atmospheric CO2 mingles with alkaline groundwater seeping from carbonate formations. These chemical swings create stress conditions that drive evolutionary innovation among the microbial communities lining the river's channels, forcing adaptation to environments that alternate between extremes with seasonal regularity. Temperature variations across Rodinia's vast expanse create pressure differentials that sustain wind systems unknown to the modern world. Air heated over the supercontinent's dark basaltic plains rises and flows toward the cooler ocean margins, where it descends and flows back inland as surface winds that maintain consistent directions for months at a time. The river system aligns itself with these atmospheric patterns, its meandering channels following valleys carved by the persistent action of directional winds over geological timescales. During winter, when Rodinia's interior loses heat to space across cloudless skies, the atmospheric circulation reverses. High-pressure systems develop over the frozen continental core, driving cold, dry air toward the ocean margins. The river system contracts during these periods, reduced to a series of isolated pools connected by underground flow through seasonally frozen ground. Ice dams create temporary lakes that store water and sediment through the long winter months, releasing their contents in dramatic floods when spring temperatures return. The monsoon system's vast scale creates feedback loops that stabilize Rodinia's climate for millions of years. The river system acts as a massive heat transfer mechanism, moving thermal energy from the sun-baked interior toward the ocean margins where it dissipates into Moravia's vast thermal mass. This circulation moderates temperature extremes that would otherwise make much of the supercontinent uninhabitable, even for extremophile bacteria. Dust storms accompany the seasonal wind reversals, transporting fine sediments across continental distances. The river system intercepts these aerial deliveries, incorporating wind-blown particles into its sedimentary load. Microscopic analysis of ancient river deposits reveals layers rich in aeolian material, tiny quartz grains with characteristic surface textures that record their atmospheric journey, volcanic ash from eruptions thousands of kilometers away, even cosmic dust that settles from space during periods of enhanced extraterrestrial bombardment. The river's response to seasonal atmospheric forcing creates depositional patterns that future geologists will recognize as evidence of monsoon climate systems. Sedimentary sequences show repeated cycles of coarse flood deposits alternating with fine-grained materials settled from standing water, recording the annual rhythm of wet and dry seasons with the precision of a geological metronome. These patterns persist for millions of years, testament to the atmospheric system's fundamental stability. only took a few 100 million years for Rodinia's atmospheric circulation to establish this remarkable consistency. The monsoon patterns that feed the river system represent the supercontinent's solution to the challenge of distributing moisture across its vast interior, an atmospheric engineering project executed by the planet's own physical laws. The river becomes both beneficiary and participant in this grand circulation, its flow patterns reinforcing the very atmospheric conditions that sustain it. Yet subtle changes creep into the monsoon system as Rodinia's configuration slowly evolves. The first hints of continental breakup appear in shifting wind patterns that redirect moisture transport pathways. Thermal domes created by rising mantle plumes alter surface temperatures in ways that disrupt established atmospheric circulation. The river system begins to feel these changes in its seasonal flow patterns, though the implications will not become clear for millions of years. Scientists studying paleoclimatic indicators find evidence of these ancient monsoons preserved in sedimentary formations from Montana to Australia, their chemical signatures recording atmospheric conditions unlike anything in the modern world. Oxygen isotope ratios in ancient carbonates reveal seasonal temperature swings of extreme magnitude, while paleosol horizons show chemical weathering patterns characteristic of alternating wet and dry conditions sustained over geological timescales. The mystery of Rodinia's atmospheric circulation lies partly in its extreme efficiency at moisture transport. Modern climate models struggle to explain how the supercontinent's interior remained habitable for so long, given its distance from oceanic moisture sources. The river system itself may hold the key to this puzzle, acting as a vast evaporative surface that recycled atmospheric moisture and maintained humidity levels sufficient to support widespread microbial life. As monsoon winds carry moisture inland from Moravia's western shores, they encounter a landscape actively being born through the patient work of the river system. Each annual flood cycle deposits new sedimentary layers, building alluvial plains that will preserve the record of this ancient climate system for future discovery. The river writes its story in stone with each passing season, creating an archive of atmospheric conditions that spans millions of years of Earth's deep history. The seasonal rhythm becomes so fundamental to the river's existence that its very channel morphology adapts to accommodate the dramatic flow variations. Wide, shallow reaches spread floodwaters across vast areas during monsoon season, while narrow, deep channels concentrate flow during dry periods. This architectural flexibility allows the river system to function efficiently across the extreme range of conditions imposed by Rodinia's continental-scale weather patterns. Stone memory flows suspended in the ancient river's embrace, each grain a messenger carrying news from landscapes that predate complex thought by hundreds of millions of years. The water lifts fragments of the Canadian Shield's crystalline heart, feldspar crystals that crystallized when Earth's crust first learned to float. Quartz grains that witnessed the planet's earliest attempts at continental formation. Heavy minerals that settled from magmas older than multicellular life. These geological ambassadors travel westward in the river's gentle custody, their surfaces polished by countless collisions during the long journey toward Moravia's waiting arms. The Grenville Mountains contribute their own distinctive signatures to the river's sedimentary cargo. Garnet crystals, born in the crushing embrace of continental collision, tumble alongside fragments of gneiss that remember when separate continents approached each other across vanished oceans. Metamorphic minerals carry within their atomic structures the pressure and temperature history of Rodinia's assembly, sillimanite needles that formed at depths measured in tens of kilometers. Staurolite crosses that crystallized in the roots of mountain ranges higher than any peaks the modern world will know. As the river carries these ancient fragments across Rodinia's interior, it sorts them according to the implacable laws of physics. Heavier minerals settle into channel bottoms during periods of slower flow, creating placer deposits that concentrate rare elements into layers invisible to any eye yet evolved to see them. Gold particles, liberated from quartz veins in distant highlands, accumulate in gravel bars alongside platinum grains and diamonds smaller than the period at the end of this sentence. The river becomes an unwitting prospector, concentrating precious metals through the patient application of flowing water and gravitational force. The belt supergroup formations, still locked in an unimaginable future, begin their formation grain by grain as the river deposits its cargo across vast alluvial plains. Each flood cycle contributes another thin layer to the growing sedimentary pile, building sequences that will eventually reach thicknesses measured in kilometers. Cross-bedded sandstones preserve the direction of ancient currents, while mudstone layers record the chemistry of the river, water itself a liquid time capsule carrying dissolved minerals from the heart of the assembling supercontinent. Stromatolites colonize the river's quieter reaches, their layered structures incorporating sediments delivered by the flowing water. These bacterial architects build their towers grain by grain, cementing riverborne particles with biological secretions to create structures that will outlast the mountains from which the sediments came. The stromatolites become living sediment traps, filtering the river's cargo and concentrating particular minerals according to the metabolic preferences of their microbial inhabitants. The river's suspended load varies dramatically with seasonal flow patterns, creating annual signatures that future geologists will read like tree rings in stone. During monsoon floods, the water turns opaque with suspended clay particles that give it the color of chocolate milk, while dry season flows run clear enough to reveal ripple marks forming on sandy channel bottoms. These seasonal variations create rhythmic bedding patterns in the accumulating sediments, alternating layers of coarse and fine materials that record the annual heartbeat of Rodinia's climate system. Chemical weathering processes operating in Rodinia's humid interior create clay minerals unknown to the modern world. The river transports these clay particles in vast quantities, their surfaces loaded with adsorbed ions that reflect the atmospheric composition of the Proterozoic era. Iron-rich clays give the river water its characteristic rust-colored tint, while aluminum-bearing varieties create temporary colloidal suspensions that scatter light in wavelengths that exist only in memory and stone. Only took several 100 million years for the Canadian Shield's granitic core to weather into the quartz grains now traveling in the river's embrace. Each sand particle represents the complete destruction of feldspar crystals that once sparkled in plutonic rocks formed during Earth's youth. The river carries forward only the most resistant minerals, those chemical combinations stable enough to survive the journey from highland source to oceanic destination. Quartz endures while feldspar dissolves, creating a natural selection process that favors geological longevity over chemical complexity. Trace elements dissolved in the river water tell stories of volcanic activity along Rodinia's distant margins. Rare earth element signatures reflect the composition of mantle sources contributing to continental growth, while isotopic ratios preserve information about the age of crustal materials being eroded from highland regions. The river becomes a chemical mixing bowl, homogenizing the diverse geological signatures of the supercontinent's assembly into a unified solution that carries the average composition of early continental crust. The sedimentary record preserves evidence of the river's ancient cargo in formations scattered across the modern world. Detrital zircon grains found in belt supergroup rocks carry uranium-lead ages that point to specific source regions in the Grenville province, their crystallization dates providing a timeline for the mountain-building events that elevated these regions above sea level. These tiny time capsules survive complete cycles of erosion and deposition, carrying their atomic clocks intact through billions of years of geological change. Paleocurrent indicators preserved in the ancient river deposits reveal the consistent westward flow direction that characterized the system throughout its existence. Crossbed orientations, imbricated pebbles, and sole marks on sandstone bedding surfaces all point toward the setting sun, recording the gravitational imperative that drove water from Rodinia's elevated interior toward Moravia's distant shores. The river never wavered in its westward commitment, following slopes created by the supercontinents assembly and maintained by its ongoing structural evolution. Scientists studying these ancient deposits encounter mysteries embedded in the sedimentary sequences, like riddles carved in stone. Why do certain heavy mineral assemblages appear only in specific stratigraphic intervals? What caused the periodic influxes of volcanic ash that create marker horizons throughout the belt supergroup? The river system preserves these enigmas in perfect detail, waiting for future researchers to develop the analytical techniques necessary to decode their meanings. The river's sorting efficiency creates size-graded deposits that reflect the energy conditions prevailing during different stages of transport and deposition. Conglomerate layers preserve evidence of catastrophic flood events, their boulder-sized clasts testament to flow velocities that modern rivers rarely achieve. Interbedded shale units record the quiet intervals between floods, when suspended sediments settled slowly through standing water to create laminated deposits as fine as paper and as regular as clockwork. Magnetic minerals carried in the river's sedimentary load align themselves with Earth's magnetic field during deposition, creating a paleomagnetic record of the planet's changing field geometry. These tiny magnetic compasses, frozen in their orientations by burial and lithification, preserve information about Rodinia's position and motion through deep time. The river unknowingly participates in recording the supercontinent's drift across Earth's surface, its deposits serving as magnetic tape that documents planetary wandering across geological timescales. As the ancient river continues its patient work of transportation and deposition, it writes the opening chapters of a story that will span the remainder of Earth's history. The sediments it carries today will become the sandstones and shales that frame oil reservoirs, host mineral deposits, and provide the raw materials for future mountain ranges. The river's cargo represents the planet's recyclable materials, endlessly reworked through the grand cycles that connect mountain building to ocean formation to continental drift and back again. Over millions of years, the ancient river system deepens and widens through the patient application of flowing water against yielding stone, carving channels that grow from modest incisions into continental-scale drainage networks. The water follows the fundamental law that governs all flowing things, seeking always the path of least resistance, while simultaneously creating new paths through the landscape it encounters. Each grain of sediment lifted from the channel bottom, each fragment of bedrock loosened by hydraulic action, contributes to the gradual excavation of valleys that will guide water flow for geological ages to come. The river's erosive power varies dramatically with seasonal flow patterns, creating a rhythm of destruction and construction that shapes the evolving landscape. During monsoon floods, when water levels rise tens of meters above dry season norms, the increased flow velocity generates hydraulic forces capable of moving boulders the size of houses. These periodic episodes of extreme erosion carve deep pools in resistant bedrock, creating basins that persist through countless flood cycles. The river remembers these excavations, returning to them during each subsequent flood to continue the patient work of deepening and widening. Chemical weathering processes accelerate in the river's humid microenvironment, where water remains in contact with bedrock surfaces for extended periods. Carbonic acid formed by atmospheric CO2 dissolving in river water slowly etches limestone formations, creating solution features that channel flow into increasingly well-defined courses. Feldspars in granite bedrock undergo hydrolysis reactions that transform crystalline minerals into clay particles, weakening the rock matrix and making it more susceptible to mechanical erosion during flood events. The river system develops a characteristic profile that reflects the balance between erosive forces and the resistance of underlying geology. Steep gradients in highland regions generate high flow velocities that carve narrow, deep channels through hard crystalline rocks. As the river enters the gentler terrain of Rhodinia's interior plains, it spreads into broader, shallower channels that meander across vast alluvial surfaces. These meandering patterns become increasingly complex over time, creating oxbow lakes and abandoned channels that add diversity to the evolving landscape. Alluvial plains expand outward from the river's main channels like slow-growing deltas built on dry land. Each flood deposits a thin layer of sediment across these plains, gradually raising their elevation and extending their boundaries. The process operates with geological patience, requiring millions of years to build the vast sedimentary platforms that will eventually become some of Earth's most extensive flat landscapes. These plains remain largely invisible beneath later geological formations, their existence known only through deep drilling and geophysical surveys. Microbial life colonizes the expanding alluvial surfaces, creating the planet's first extensive terrestrial ecosystems. Cyanobacteria form living mats that trap sediment during floods and bind soil particles with biological secretions during dry periods. These bacterial communities create their own microenvironments, moderating temperature extremes and maintaining moisture levels that support diverse microbial populations. The mats develop complex internal structures, with different bacterial species occupying distinct layers based on their tolerance for light, oxygen, and chemical conditions. The river system's expanding network connects previously isolated microbial communities, allowing genetic exchange between populations separated by vast distances. Bacterial spores travel in the flowing water, colonizing new habitats and introducing genetic diversity that drives evolutionary innovation. These biological exchanges operate over timescales measured in millions of years, creating gradual changes in microbial ecology that parallel the river system's physical evolution. Seasonal variations in water chemistry create selective pressures that shape microbial evolution in directions that will prove crucial for Earth's future development. During dry seasons, when river flow concentrates and mineral content increases, salt-tolerant bacteria gain competitive advantages. Flood periods favor species capable of rapid reproduction in dilute, nutrient-rich conditions. These alternating selection pressures drive the evolution of metabolic flexibility that will later prove essential for life's expansion into diverse environmental niches. Only took about 50 million years for the river system to carve its network to mature dimensions, a brief interval in geological terms, but sufficient for significant landscape modification. The valleys excavated during this period create topographic features that influence regional climate patterns, channeling atmospheric moisture and moderating temperature extremes across broad areas. The river system becomes a landscape architect, designing terrain features that will persist long after the water that carved them has found new paths to the sea. The deepening river channels expose progressively older rock formations, creating geological cross-sections that reveal Rhodinia's assembly history. Basement rocks formed during the supercontinent's construction emerge in canyon walls where the river cuts through overlying sedimentary sequences. These exposures provide glimpses into deep time, revealing the complex history of continental collision and mountain building that created the highland regions now being systematically dismantled by flowing water. Tributaries develop their own characteristic patterns of erosion and deposition, each reflecting local geological conditions and climatic influences. Some follow zones of structural weakness in the bedrock, carving straight valleys along fault systems or igneous intrusions. Others create dendritic patterns that spread like tree branches across uniform geological formations, their spacing and orientation determined by subtle variations in rock resistance and topographic slope. The river system's evolution creates feedback mechanisms that influence its own future development. As channels deepen, they capture drainage from adjacent watersheds, redirecting flow patterns and accelerating erosion in new areas. Valley walls steepened by river incision become unstable, generating landslides that deliver massive sediment loads to the flowing water. These processes operate in complex cycles that can persist for millions of years before reaching new equilibrium states. Scientists studying ancient river systems find evidence of these long-term evolutionary processes preserved in sedimentary sequences that record changes in flow patterns, sediment supply, and channel morphology over geological timescales. Paleo-channel deposits reveal the locations of ancient river courses, while variations in grain size and sedimentary structures document changes in flow regime and erosional intensity. The rock record becomes a library of river evolution, preserving information about landscape development processes that operate too slowly for direct observation. The mystery of ancient river longevity puzzles researchers who study the balance between landscape change and system persistence. How do river networks maintain their basic configuration while simultaneously modifying the terrain through which they flow? The answer appears to lie in the self-organizing properties of flowing water, which automatically adjusts channel dimensions and flow patterns to accommodate changing conditions while preserving the fundamental drainage network structure. As the river system matures, it develops increasing resistance to dramatic reorganization, its deeply incised channels becoming permanent features that guide water flow regardless of climate variations or tectonic activity. The landscape learns to accommodate flowing water, while the water learns to work within the constraints imposed by the evolving terrain. This mutual adaptation creates stability within change, allowing ancient river systems to persist through the vast timescales required for continental drift and climate evolution. The expanding alluvial plains become repositories for paleoclimatic information, their sedimentary sequences recording variations in precipitation, temperature, and atmospheric composition over millions of years. Paleosol horizons preserve chemical signatures of ancient weathering processes, while organic carbon concentrations reflect the productivity of early terrestrial ecosystems. These records provide glimpses into Earth's environmental history during one of the planet's most important transitional periods. The ancient river flows beneath skies that hold half the oxygen that fills your lungs tonight, its waters reflecting an atmosphere still caught between the reducing chemistry of Earth's youth and the oxidizing conditions that will one day support complex life. The Proterozoic atmosphere maintains a delicate balance, with oxygen levels hovering around 10% of modern concentrations, sufficient to rust iron formations, but insufficient to sustain the metabolic demands of large multicellular organisms. This thin oxygen blanket creates a world where atmospheric chemistry operates according to rules that will never again govern Earth's surface. Above the river's meandering channels, carbon dioxide concentrations exceed modern levels by factors of 10 or more, creating a greenhouse effect that maintains global temperatures warm enough to prevent permanent ice caps despite the sun's reduced luminosity. The young star burns with only 70% of its current intensity, yet Earth's surface remains largely ice-free thanks to the atmospheric composition that traps solar radiation with extraordinary efficiency. Water vapor amplifies this greenhouse warming, creating feedback loops that stabilize temperatures within ranges compatible with liquid water across most of the planet's surface. Cyanobacteria in the river's shallows continue their ancient work of photosynthesis, splitting water molecules to liberate oxygen that bubbles toward the surface like tiny prayers offered to the changing sky. These microscopic organisms operate the planet's primary oxygen production system, their collective metabolism gradually altering atmospheric composition through the patient accumulation of photosynthetic waste products. Each oxygen molecule released represents a small victory over the reducing chemistry that dominated Earth's first 2 billion years, a molecular testimony to life's power to transform entire planets. The river water itself carries dissolved gases that reflect the atmospheric composition above. Carbon dioxide levels in the water exceed modern river concentrations by orders of magnitude, creating carbonic acid solutions that accelerate chemical weathering of bedrock formations. This enhanced weathering consumes atmospheric CO2 through mineral carbonation reactions, creating a negative feedback mechanism that prevents runaway greenhouse warming despite the elevated atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations. Methane contributes significantly to the atmospheric greenhouse effect, produced by anaerobic bacteria in sediments beneath the river's quieter reaches. These methanogens thrive in oxygen-depleted environments, processing organic matter into methane gas that escapes to the atmosphere through bubble streams that create temporary disturbances on the water's surface. The methane molecules absorb infrared radiation with exceptional efficiency, contributing to global warming despite their relatively low atmospheric concentrations. Hydrogen sulfide occasionally colors the atmosphere above volcanic regions along Rodinea's margins, creating temporary episodes of atmospheric toxicity that stress even the most hardy microbial communities. The river system carries dissolved sulfur compounds from these volcanic sources, distributing them throughout the watershed and creating chemical signatures that will persist in sedimentary deposits for hundreds of millions of years. These sulfur pulses record periods of enhanced volcanic activity associated with the tectonic processes that assembled and will eventually dismember the supercontinent. The atmospheric circulation patterns that drive Rodinea's monsoon system depend critically on the enhanced greenhouse warming provided by elevated CO2 concentrations. The strong temperature gradients between continental interior and oceanic margins create pressure differentials that sustain wind systems of continental scale and seasonal duration. Without this greenhouse amplification, the supercontinent's interior would become too cold to support the atmospheric moisture transport that feeds the river system during monsoon seasons. Only took about 2 billion years for cyanobacteria to transform Earth's atmosphere from a reducing to an oxidizing environment, a planetary engineering project executed by organisms too simple to comprehend their own significance. The river system benefits from this atmospheric transformation, its waters carrying dissolved oxygen that supports more diverse microbial communities than could survive in the anoxic conditions that characterized earlier eras. The oxygen also enables more efficient recycling of nutrients through oxidative weathering processes that break down organic matter and release essential elements back to the water column. Ozone concentrations in the upper atmosphere remain insufficient to provide complete protection from ultraviolet radiation, creating surface conditions that limit biological activity to environments with natural UV shielding. The river's deeper pools and sediment-clouded waters provide refugia where microbial life can flourish without excessive radiation damage. Stromatolites grow preferentially in these protected environments, their layered structures creating additional UV protection for the bacterial communities within. The atmospheric pressure at Rodinea's surface differs subtly from modern conditions, reflecting the changing composition and total mass of the atmosphere over geological time. Lower oxygen. Partial pressures affect the solubility of gases in river water, While higher CO2 concentrations influence the pH buffering capacity of natural waters, these chemical differences create aquatic environments unlike any that exist in the modern world, with unique selective pressures that drive microbial evolution in directions that will prove crucial for life's future diversification. Nitrogen fixation processes operating in the river's microbial mats depend on anaerobic conditions that become increasingly difficult to maintain as atmospheric oxygen levels gradually rise. Specialized bacteria develop protective mechanisms to shield their nitrogen-fixing enzymes from oxygen damage, creating cellular compartments and temporal strategies that allow continued nitrogen metabolism in oxidizing environments. These evolutionary innovations will later prove essential for the development of complex ecosystems that require large quantities of biologically available nitrogen. Scientists studying ancient atmospheric compositions find evidence preserved in sedimentary rocks that record gas concentrations through proxy measurements of mineral oxidation states and isotopic signatures. Red bed formations indicate oxidizing conditions, while reduced iron minerals suggest anoxic environments. The river system's deposits preserve these atmospheric signatures in exquisite detail, creating a record of atmospheric evolution that spans millions of years of Earth's transition toward modern conditions. The mystery of atmospheric oxygen regulation puzzles researchers who study the feedback mechanisms that prevent complete atmospheric oxidation or reduction. The river system plays a crucial role in these regulatory processes, transporting reduced compounds from continental interiors to oceanic environments where they consume atmospheric oxygen through oxidation reactions. This circulation maintains atmospheric redox balance within ranges that support both anaerobic and aerobic metabolism simultaneously. Trace gases present in minute concentrations nevertheless exert significant influences on atmospheric chemistry and climate regulation. Nitrous oxide produced by bacterial metabolism in river sediments contributes to greenhouse warming while also participating in ozone destruction processes in the upper atmosphere. These trace gas cycles operate with complexity that rivals the major atmospheric components, creating intricate feedback loops that stabilize environmental conditions over geological timescales. As solar luminosity gradually increases over astronomical timescales, the atmospheric greenhouse effect must weaken proportionally to prevent runaway warming that would boil away the oceans. The river system participates in this long-term climate regulation through enhanced weathering processes that consume atmospheric CO2 as temperatures rise. Chemical weathering rates increase exponentially with temperature, creating a powerful negative feedback that automatically adjusts atmospheric greenhouse warming to compensate for stellar evolution. The ancient atmosphere creates optical phenomena that paint Rodinia skies in colors unknown to the modern world. Enhanced scattering by atmospheric particles creates sunset colors shifted toward longer wavelengths, while different gas concentrations modify the intensity and spectral distribution of scattered sunlight. The river reflects these alien skies, its surface capturing photons that have traveled through an atmosphere that will never again exist in Earth's history. Deep beneath the ancient river's meandering channels, forces beyond the comprehension of flowing water begin their patient work of continental destruction. The mantle plumes that will eventually tear Rodinia apart rise through the Earth's interior like thermal ghosts, their superheated rock ascending at velocities measured in centimeters per year. These deep currents operate according to convective principles that dwarf the river's surface circulation, moving material across vertical distances measured in thousands of kilometers, while the river measures its journey in horizontal expanses across the supercontinent's face. The river flows unknowingly across the sites of future rifting, its channels following valleys that mark the earliest stages of continental breakup, still hundreds of millions of years in the future. Thermal domes created by ascending mantle plumes lift portions of Rodinia's crust by subtle amounts, elevations, changes too gradual for the river to notice, but sufficient to alter regional drainage patterns over geological timescales. The water continues its westward journey, oblivious to the fact that the very bedrock beneath its channels participates in motion that will reshape the planet's surface configuration. Seismic activity increases gradually across regions where mantle plumes approach the base of the continental crust, generating earthquakes too infrequent and subtle to disrupt the river's flow, but persistent enough to create cumulative changes in topography. Fault systems develop along zones of crustal weakness, their movements measured in millimeters per year, but sustained over millions of years. The river system adapts to these changes through minor adjustments in channel position and gradient, its flexibility allowing it to accommodate the slow-motion violence of continental tectonics. Heat flow from the ascending mantle plumes begins to affect groundwater circulation patterns beneath the river system, creating thermal anomalies that manifest as warm springs along certain reaches of the channel network. These geothermal features support microbial communities with elevated metabolic rates, their biological productivity enhanced by the additional thermal energy supplied from the Earth's interior. The springs discharge water with distinctive chemical signatures that reflect interaction with heated rock formations at depth, creating traceable plumes of altered water chemistry that extend downstream for hundreds of kilometers. Volcanic activity along Rodinia's margins intensifies as mantle plumes reach the surface, generating ashfalls that occasionally dust the river system with layers of volcanic glass and crystal fragments. These airborne deliveries of igneous material alter the river's sedimentary load, introducing mineral assemblages that differ dramatically from the weathering products of local bedrock. The volcanic ash provides nutrients that trigger biological blooms in the river's microbial communities, while also creating temporary water quality changes that stress organisms adapted to more stable chemical conditions. The river system begins to respond to the subtle topographic changes created by thermal uplift, though the adjustments operate over timescales that make them invisible to direct observation. Channel gradients decrease incrementally as thermal doming raises portions of the drainage basin, reducing flow velocities and altering patterns of erosion and deposition. Sediment accumulation rates change in response to these modifications, creating stratigraphic signatures that will eventually allow future geologists to recognize the timing and magnitude of pre-rifting thermal events. Only took about 50 million years for the mantle plumes to rise from their origin depths to positions where they begin affecting surface geology. A rapid ascent in mantle convection terms, but still imperceptible to the river system operating on much shorter timescales. The plumes carry with them chemical signatures that reflect deep earth processes, elevated temperatures, distinctive isotopic compositions, trace element concentrations that differ from normal mantle materials. These deep signatures will eventually appear in volcanic rocks erupted when the plumes reach the surface. Magmatic intrusions begin to emplace at depth beneath portions of the river system, creating subsurface heat sources that alter local hydrology and groundwater chemistry. The intrusions remain hidden beneath kilometers of overlying rock, their presence detectable only through subtle changes in surface phenomena. Hot springs become more numerous along certain river reaches, while groundwater temperatures increase gradually over broad areas. These thermal anomalies create unique environments for thermophilic bacteria that thrive in elevated temperature conditions. The ascending mantle plumes generate convective circulation patterns in the overlying asthenosphere that begin to influence regional plate motions. Rodinia's structural stability, maintained for hundreds of millions of years through the balance of forces that assembled the supercontinent, starts to shift as new convective cells develop beneath the continental mass. The changes operate too slowly to affect the river system directly, but they initiate the sequence of events that will eventually reorganize global geography. Extensional stresses develop in Rodinia's crust as thermal expansion and buoyant uplift begin to stretch the continental lithosphere beyond its elastic limits. Fault systems that remained dormant throughout the supercontinent's assembly phase reactivate under the new stress regime, creating pathways for magma intrusion and groundwater circulation. The river system occasionally intersects these fault zones, following valleys where differential erosion has exploited zones of crustal weakness created by the developing rift system. Scientists studying the geological record find evidence of this pre-rifting phase preserved in sedimentary sequences that record subtle changes in drainage patterns, sediment provenance, and volcanic activity. Detrital zircon populations shift as new source regions become available through fault-controlled erosion, while heavy mineral assemblages reflect changing proportions of volcanic versus plutonic input. The river system unknowingly documents these changes in its sedimentary deposits, creating an archive of continental breakup processes that spans the transition from stability to active rifting. The mystery of mantle plume generation deep within the Earth remains one of geology's fundamental unsolved problems. What triggers the ascent of these thermal anomalies from the core mantle boundary? How do they maintain their coherence during the 1,000-kilometer journey to the surface? The river system flows above one of nature's grandest experiments in heat transfer and mass transport. Though the connection between surface hydrology and deep Earth dynamics will not be recognized for hundreds of millions of years, regional metamorphism intensifies in the lower crust as elevated heat flow from ascending mantle plumes drives recrystallization of existing rock formations. These metamorphic processes release fluids that migrate upward through the crust, eventually emerging as chemically distinctive springs along the river system. The spring waters carry dissolved minerals that reflect high-temperature mineral reactions occurring at depths of tens of kilometers, providing the surface world with chemical messages from the deep crustal environment. As thermal uplift continues, some tributaries of the river system begin to experience flow reversals, where channels that formerly drained toward the main river now flow away from thermally elevated regions. These drainage reorganizations operate gradually, requiring thousands of years to redirect significant amounts of water flow. The river network demonstrates remarkable resilience, maintaining overall connectivity despite local modifications to its tributary structure. The ancient river system maintains its fundamental westward orientation despite the geological stirrings beneath its bed, testament to the conservative nature of established drainage patterns. The water continues to seek Moravia's distant shores with the same persistence that characterized its flow for millions of years, seemingly immune to the revolutionary changes developing in the planetary interior. Yet, the seeds of transformation take root in the mantle depths, growing slowly but inexorably toward the day when they will fundamentally alter the river's world. Magnetic anomalies begin to develop above the ascending mantle plumes as elevated temperatures approach the Curie point of magnetic minerals in the lower crust. These thermal demagnetization effects create subtle distortions in the local magnetic field that will eventually be detected by paleomagnetic analysis of the river system's sedimentary deposits. The magnetic anomalies provide additional evidence for deep thermal processes operating beneath the apparently stable continental surface. The river system begins to fragment and reorganize as the early stages of Rodinia's breakup redirect ancient drainage patterns that have remained stable for hundreds of millions of years. New topography emerges along incipient rift zones, where thermal uplift creates modest divides that separate formerly connected watersheds. The river responds to these changes with the fluid adaptability that characterizes all flowing water, finding new paths when old ones become blocked, abandoning established channels when tectonic forces alter the landscape's hydraulic geometry. Initial rifting creates shallow depressions that capture portions of the river's flow, diverting water into temporary lakes and wetlands that did not exist during Rodinia's stable period. These proto-rift valleys develop their own microenvironments where water chemistry differs from the main river system due to increased residence times and enhanced rock-water interaction. Evaporation concentrates dissolved minerals in these isolated basins, creating brine pools that support extremophile bacteria adapted to high salinity conditions. The forming Iapetus Ocean exists only as a narrow seaway along Rodinia's eastern margin, but its presence begins to influence continental drainage patterns through the gravitational attraction of a new base level. Some tributaries that formerly flowed westward toward Moravia now find shorter paths to the emerging ocean basin, their waters carrying sediments toward shorelines that are being borne through the patient work of seafloor spreading. These redirected streams create new deltas and coastal plains along the Iapetus margin, building sedimentary sequences that will eventually become part of the Appalachian mountain system. Fault-controlled valleys provide the river system with new pathways that follow lines of structural weakness created by extensional tectonics. The water exploits these zones of fractured rock with the opportunistic efficiency that characterizes all erosional processes, carving channels along fault scarps and excavating grabens where differential subsidence creates topographic lows. These structurally controlled channels develop distinctive morphologies that differ from the meandering patterns typical of streams flowing across uniform substrates. Volcanic activity along active rift zones periodically disrupts local drainage patterns through lava flows and pyroclastic deposits that dam stream channels and create temporary lakes. The river system demonstrates remarkable resilience to these volcanic interruptions, finding alternative routes around new obstacles and re-establishing flow connections across modified terrain. Some volcanic dams persist for thousands of years before being breached by accumulated water pressure, creating catastrophic flood events that carve deep gorges through resistant volcanic rocks. The river's chemical composition changes as it incorporates water from geothermal springs that become increasingly numerous along active fault systems. These springs discharge fluids heated by proximity to magmatic intrusions, their elevated temperatures and distinctive chemistry creating chemical plumes that can be traced for hundreds of kilometers downstream. The geothermal input alters the river's pH, dissolved gas content, and trace element concentrations, creating new environmental niches for thermophilic microorganisms. Only took about 20 million years for the initial rift systems to develop sufficient topographic relief to begin seriously affecting continental drainage patterns, a brief interval that nevertheless represents hundreds of thousands of river generations. The water flowing through today's channels has no connection to the water that carved the original valleys, yet the river system maintains continuity through the constant replacement of its substance while preserving the essential patterns of its flow network. Salt lakes form enclosed basins created by fault block topography, their surfaces rising and falling with climatic variations that concentrate or dilute their mineral content. During dry periods, these lakes evaporate to expose crystalline salt flats that stretch beyond the horizon like frozen seas. The river system feeds these interior basins during wet seasons, carrying dissolved minerals that accumulate through evaporative concentration to create some of Earth's first large-scale evaporate deposits. Groundwater flow patterns reorganize in response to the changing surface topography, creating new spring systems that emerge along valley floors where the water table intersects the land surface. These springs often discharge along lines that mark buried fault systems, their locations revealing the hidden structural framework that controls subsurface hydrology. The spring waters carry chemical signatures that reflect their underground journey through fractured bedrock and their interaction with mineral assemblages exposed by faulting. The river system's network topology becomes increasingly complex as new drainage divides form along thermal uplifts and existing channels adapt to modified base levels. Tributary systems that formerly drained toward a single confluence now split their flow between multiple outlets, creating distributary patterns that resemble delta systems formed on dry land. These flow splits operate according to hydraulic principles that automatically balance discharge through multiple channels based on their relative resistance to flow. Scientists studying ancient rift systems find evidence of these drainage modifications preserved in sedimentary sequences that record changes in flow direction, sediment provenance, and depositional environment. Paleocurrent indicators show the progressive rotation of drainage patterns as new topography develops, while detrital mineral assemblages reflect the unroofing of different source terrains through fault-controlled erosion. The river system becomes an unwitting recorder of continental breakup processes, documenting tectonic evolution through the sedimentary archive it creates. The mystery of river system persistence during continental rifting challenges researchers who study the balance between geological disruption and hydrological continuity. How do drainage networks maintain their essential functions while accommodating fundamental changes in the structural framework that supports them? The answer appears to lie in the hierarchical organization of river systems, where local modifications in tributary structure can occur without disrupting the overall drainage pattern. Sediment transport patterns change dramatically as the river system encounters new topographic obstacles and altered flow paths created by active faulting. Some reaches experience increased erosion rates as steeper gradients develop along fault scarps, while others become sites of enhanced deposition where flow velocity decreases in newly formed basins. These changes in sediment flux create complex depositional patterns that preserve detailed records of the rift development process. Lake systems proliferate in the structurally controlled basins that characterize early rift environments, their water chemistry reflecting the balance between surface inflow and groundwater discharge. Some lakes develop permanent stratification as deep basins restrict vertical mixing, creating anoxic bottom waters that preserve organic matter and fine-grained sediments with exceptional fidelity. These lake deposits become important archives of environmental change during the continental breakup period. As the rift system continues to develop, some portions of the ancient river network become isolated from their former connections to Morovia, creating internal drainage systems that terminate in evaporative basins rather than reaching the ocean. These endorheic systems develop their own characteristic water chemistry as dissolved minerals accumulate through evaporative concentration without oceanic dilution. The water becomes increasingly saline over time, supporting unique microbial communities adapted to hypersaline conditions. The branching and reorganization of the river system creates opportunities for evolutionary innovation among aquatic microbial communities as populations become isolated in separate drainage basins. Genetic isolation leads to divergent evolution as different basins develop distinct environmental conditions that select for different metabolic strategies and physiological adaptations. The continental breakup process inadvertently conducts a vast biological experiment in evolution and speciation. New mineral assemblages begin to appear in the river's sedimentary load as fault systems expose deep, crustal rocks that were previously buried beneath kilometers of overlying formations. These exotic minerals carry distinctive age signatures and chemical compositions that reflect high pressure, high temperature conditions in the lower continental crust. Their appearance in river sediments provides evidence for the magnitude of vertical displacement associated with normal faulting during continental extension. The ancient river flows with the color of liquid rust through landscapes that know no green. Its waters tinted by iron-rich sediments that speak to the chemical peculiarities of a world still learning the rules of oxidation. Iron formations dissolved from upstream sources give the flowing water a reddish-brown hue that shifts with the seasons, deepening during dry periods when mineral concentrations increase and lightening during monsoon floods when fresh rainwater dilutes the metallic brew. This rusty river carries within its chemistry the story of Earth's great atmospheric transition, each dissolved iron atom a witness to the planet's struggle between reducing and oxidizing conditions. Banded iron formations contribute their distinctive mineralogy to the river's cargo, releasing alternating layers of magnetite and hematite that record ancient oscillations in atmospheric oxygen levels. These iron minerals settle differently in the flowing water based on their magnetic properties and specific gravities, creating natural sorting processes that concentrate magnetic particles in certain reaches while dispersing non-magnetic varieties across broader areas. The river becomes an unwitting metallurgist, separating iron minerals according to physical properties that reflect their formation under different atmospheric conditions. Seasonal variations create dramatic changes in water color that follow predictable annual rhythms tied to Rodinia's monsoon climate patterns. During the dry season, when river flow concentrates and groundwater contributions increase proportionally, the water takes on the deep amber color of concentrated iron solutions. Wet season dilution shifts the color toward lighter browns and oranges as surface runoff carries less concentrated mineral loads. These color changes create visual signatures that would allow hypothetical observers to track seasonal progression across the supercontinent. The iron-rich chemistry creates unique selective pressures for microbial communities that must adapt to high concentrations of potentially toxic metals. Iron-reducing bacteria thrive in the river's sediments, using dissolved iron compounds as electron acceptors in anaerobic respiratory processes that generate energy while precipitating solid iron minerals. These biological processes modify water chemistry on local scales, creating microenvironments with distinctive redox conditions that support specialized microbial ecosystems. Stromatolites growing in the river's iron-rich waters incorporate metal oxides into their layered structures, creating distinctively colored formations that range from deep red to golden brown depending on the dominant iron mineral phases present during construction. These bacterial towers become living monuments to the river's chemistry, preserving in their growth bands a record of seasonal and longer-term variations in metal concentrations. The stromatolites develop enhanced structural stability through the incorporation of iron minerals, their metal-reinforced frameworks resisting erosion more effectively than purely organic constructions. Only took several 100 million years for atmospheric oxygen to reach levels sufficient to rust iron formations on continental scales, transforming the planet's surface from gray and black basaltic terrain to the rusty red landscapes that characterize much of Rodinia's interior. The river system participates in this great oxidation through its role in transporting dissolved iron from weathering source rocks to depositional environments where changing redox conditions precipitate new mineral phases. Trace elements associated with iron formations create distinctive chemical signatures that allow future scientists to identify sediments derived from specific geological formations. Rare earth elements bound to iron oxides maintain their associations during transport and deposition, creating geochemical fingerprints that survive metamorphism and weathering cycles that destroy other provenance indicators. The river unknowingly transports these chemical signatures across continental distances, mixing and homogenizing the diverse geological heritage of Rhodinia's assembly. The river's iron content varies dramatically along its course, as different tributary systems contribute water with distinctive metal concentrations. Streams draining Archean terrains carry heavy loads of dissolved iron from ancient banded iron formations, while tributaries from younger volcanic terrains contribute different suites of trace metals associated with magmatic processes. These chemical mixing processes create complex downstream patterns of metal distribution that reflect the geological diversity of the supercontinent's crustal architecture. Photochemical processes operating in the iron-rich water create unique optical phenomena as sunlight interacts with dissolved metal complexes. Certain wavelengths of light become preferentially absorbed by iron-bearing molecules, shifting the spectral composition of transmitted light toward longer wavelengths. This selective absorption creates water that appears to glow with internal fire when viewed in appropriate lighting conditions, its rusty surface reflecting modified sunlight that carries the chemical signature of dissolved metals. Seasonal stratification develops in deeper pools where iron-rich bottom waters become isolated from surface layers during periods of reduced mixing. These stratified conditions create sharp chemical gradients that support different microbial communities at various depths, with iron-reducing bacteria dominating the anoxic bottom waters, while photosynthetic cyanobacteria flourish in the oxidized surface layers. The interface between these zones becomes a site of intense biological activity as different metabolic processes compete for available chemical resources. Scientists studying ancient river systems find evidence of iron-rich paleohydrology preserved in sedimentary rocks that retain the chemical signatures of metal-rich water despite hundreds of millions of years of subsequent geological history. Red bed formations preserve iron oxide cements that precipitated from iron-bearing river water, while paleosol horizons show chemical alteration patterns characteristic of iron-rich groundwater systems. These geological archives document the chemistry of ancient hydrological cycles operating under atmospheric conditions unlike any in the modern world. The mystery of iron transport efficiency in ancient river systems puzzles researchers who study the balance between dissolution and precipitation processes that control metal mobility in natural waters. Modern rivers rarely maintain iron concentrations approaching those inferred for Proterozoic systems, yet the ancient river clearly transported enormous quantities of dissolved iron across continental distances. The solution may lie in the unique atmospheric chemistry that prevented rapid oxidation and precipitation of iron minerals during transport. Magnetic minerals suspended in the iron-rich water align with Earth's magnetic field during transport and deposition, creating paleomagnetic records that preserve information about the planet's changing field geometry. These tiny magnetic particles become fossilized compasses that document Rhodinia's position and motion through deep time. Their orientations frozen by burial and lithification into permanent records of ancient magnetic field directions. The river unknowingly participates in documenting planetary behavior through its role as a transport agent for magnetic minerals. Chemical precipitation processes operating in the iron-rich water create distinctive mineral assemblages that form through the interaction of dissolved metals with changing pH and oxygen levels. Goethite needles crystallize in oxygenated surface waters, while pyrite forms in reducing sediments where sulfur-bearing compounds interact with dissolved iron. These mineral precipitation processes remove iron from solution, creating local zones of chemical depletion that influence the river's carrying capacity for metal transport. The iron-rich river chemistry creates distinctive corrosion patterns on exposed rock surfaces that accelerate weathering processes beyond rates typical of metal-poor waters. Chemical etching by iron-bearing acids creates surface textures that increase the effective surface area available for further weathering reactions, establishing positive feedback loops that enhance the river's capacity for rock dissolution and sediment generation. These enhanced weathering processes contribute to the river's high sediment loads and distinctive chemical composition. As the ancient river continues its westward journey toward Moravia's distant shores, it carries within its rusty waters the chemical essence of a planet in transition between ancient and modern atmospheric conditions. The iron-rich chemistry that colors its flow represents more than simple mineral transport. It documents Earth's great experiment in atmospheric engineering, the gradual transformation from a reducing to an oxidizing world through the patient work of photosynthetic organisms operating across geological timescales. As Rodinia drifts and rotates through space, carried by the same plate motions that assembled the supercontinent from scattered fragments. The ancient river system experiences Earth's magnetic field in orientations that will never be repeated in the planet's subsequent history. The magnetic field itself behaves differently during this ancient epoch, its intensity and stability patterns reflecting core dynamics that operate according to principles still poorly understood by future scientists who study paleomagnetic records preserved in the river's sedimentary deposits. The magnetic minerals carried in the river's flow, tiny crystals of magnetite and hematite, weathered from iron formations and igneous intrusions, act as microscopic compass needles that align themselves with the prevailing magnetic field direction during transport and deposition. These mineral compasses respond to field orientations that exist nowhere in the modern world, as Rodinia occupies latitudes and longitudes that represent unique combinations of geographic and magnetic coordinates. Each grain of magnetic sediment becomes a frozen record of the planet's magnetic behavior during this singular period in Earth's rotational and orbital history. Apparent polar wanderpaths traced by paleomagnetic analysis of the river's deposits document Rodinia's complex motion across Earth's surface as the supercontinent responds to convective forces operating in the underlying mantle. The magnetic inclination angles recorded in successive sedimentary layers reveal the supercontinent's gradual drift from equatorial to polar latitudes, while declination variations track its rotation as different margins face toward and away from the magnetic poles. These paleomagnetic signatures create a navigation record that allows future scientists to reconstruct Rodinia's journey through deep time. The river system flows across regions that experience dramatically different magnetic field intensities, as Rodinia's rotation carries various portions of the continent through zones of strengthened and weakened field strength. Magnetic anomalies created by local geological features, iron ore deposits, igneous intrusions, fault systems filled with magnetic minerals create complex field patterns that influence the orientation of magnetic particles settling in the river's sediments. These local magnetic signatures become superimposed on the regional field patterns, creating composite records that document both global and local magnetic phenomena. Geomagnetic reversals occur with frequencies that differ from modern patterns, reflecting core processes that operate under thermal and compositional conditions unique to this period in Earth's history. The river's deposits preserve these reversal sequences as alternating zones of normal and reverse magnetic polarity, creating a magnetic tape recorder that documents the planet's changing field behavior over millions of years. Some reversal events occur rapidly enough to be recorded within individual flood deposits, while others span time intervals longer than the river system's individual channel migration cycles. Only took about 50 million years for Rodinia to complete significant rotational adjustments that altered the magnetic field orientations experienced by the river system. Brief intervals in geological terms, but sufficient to create detectable changes in paleomagnetic signatures. The supercontinent's motion operates according to forces generated thousands of kilometers below the river's bed. Yet the magnetic minerals in the flowing water faithfully record these deep earth processes through their response to changing field directions. Magnetic declination patterns recorded in the river's sediments reveal the complex three-dimensional geometry of Earth's magnetic field during the Proterozoic era, when field morphology differed substantially from modern dipolar configurations. Non-dipolar field components created regional magnetic anomalies that influenced compass directions across continental distances, generating magnetic declination patterns that varied systematically with geographic position. The river system unknowingly sampled these varying field directions as it flowed across Rodinia's vast expanse. Secular variation in magnetic field direction and intensity creates short-term fluctuations that appear as high-frequency noise superimposed on the longer-term trends associated with continental drift and polar wander. These rapid magnetic changes reflect convective processes operating in Earth's outer core, where fluid motions generate the magnetic field through dynamo mechanisms that remain imperfectly understood. The river's annually deposited sediment layers preserve these secular variations with sufficient resolution to document magnetic field behavior on human timescales. The magnetic properties of the river's sedimentary deposits undergo systematic changes during burial and lithification as increasing temperature and pressure alter the stability and composition of magnetic minerals. Low-temperature oxidation converts magnetite to magamite, while higher temperature metamorphism transforms magnetic minerals into non-magnetic phases that lose their ability to record ancient field directions. These post-depositional changes complicate the interpretation of paleomagnetic records, requiring careful analysis to separate primary magnetic signatures from secondary overprints. Magnetic mineral concentrations vary systematically along the river's course as hydraulic sorting processes segregate particles based on their magnetic susceptibility and density. Heavy magnetic minerals accumulate in channel bottom deposits where flow velocities remain high, while lighter magnetic particles settle in overbank environments during flood events. These sorting processes create spatial patterns of magnetic mineral distribution that influence the quality and intensity of paleomagnetic signals preserved in different depositional environments. Scientists studying ancient magnetic field behavior find evidence of unusual field geometries preserved in Proterozoic rocks that suggest core dynamics operated differently during Earth's Middle Age than in more recent times. Paleomagnetic inclination angles indicate field configurations that deviate significantly from simple dipolar models, while magnetic intensity estimates suggest field strengths that exceeded modern values by factors of 2 or more. The river system's deposits contribute to this database of ancient magnetic field behavior through their high-resolution record of field direction and intensity variations. The mystery of magnetic field generation in the early Earth remains one of geophysics' fundamental unsolved problems, with important implications for understanding planetary evolution and the development of conditions suitable for life. The river system's paleomagnetic record provides crucial data for testing models of ancient core dynamics, though the interpretation of these records requires careful consideration of the complex processes that affect magnetic mineral behavior during transport, deposition, and subsequent geological history. Magnetic stratigraphy developed from the river's deposits creates a framework for correlating sedimentary sequences across vast distances and establishing relative timing relationships between geological events occurring in different parts of Rodinia. Distinctive magnetic polarity patterns serve as time markers that allow precise correlation of sedimentary layers even when other dating methods prove unreliable. These magnetic correlation techniques provide essential tools for reconstructing the timing and sequence of events during Rodinia's assembly and eventual breakup. As magnetic field orientations shift in response to Rodinia's drift and rotation, the river system's biological communities experience changing levels of protection from cosmic radiation that depends on magnetic field strength and geometry. Magnetic field variations influence the intensity of cosmic ray bombardment reaching Earth's surface, creating fluctuations in background radiation levels that may drive evolutionary changes in radiation-sensitive organisms. The magnetic field acts as a planetary shield whose effectiveness varies with field strength and configuration. The ancient river carries its cargo of magnetic minerals westward toward Moravia's shores, each particle aligned according to magnetic field directions that will never again characterize any location on Earth's surface. These microscopic compasses preserve in their orientations the memory of Rodinia's unique position in space and time, creating an archive of planetary magnetic behavior that spans one of the most important periods in Earth's geological and biological evolution. The magnetic record becomes a testament to the planet's dynamic nature, documenting changes that operate on timescales far beyond human perception, but within the patient memory of stone and mineral. The first winter that will last for millions of years begins to cast its shadow across Rodinia's vast expanse as global climate systems prepare for the transition into one of Earth's most extreme environmental episodes. The ancient river system flows through a world on the verge of transformation, its waters still carrying the thermal memory of warmer times, while atmospheric and oceanic circulation patterns slowly reorganize themselves according to the inexorable logic of approaching glaciation. Ice sheets that will eventually cover much of the planet's surface exist only as seasonal snow patches in Rodinia's highest elevations, their presence creating subtle but measurable changes in regional albedo and precipitation patterns. The river's flow regime begins to shift in response to cooling temperatures that affect both precipitation patterns and evaporation rates across the supercontinent's interior. Monsoon systems that have sustained the river for millions of years weaken as thermal gradients between continental and oceanic regions diminish with global cooling. The atmospheric circulation patterns that once drove moisture deep into Rodinia's interior lose their strength as temperature differentials decrease, creating the first signs of the hydrological reorganization that will characterize the approaching ice age. Seasonal ice formation extends its duration and geographic range as average temperatures drop below critical thresholds that have remained stable for geological ages. The river experiences longer periods of surface freezing, with ice coverage extending from polar regions toward lower latitudes where frozen conditions never previously occurred. These ice dams create temporary lakes that store water and sediment through extended winter seasons, fundamentally altering the river system's flow patterns and sediment transport mechanisms. Permafrost development begins in Rodinia's northern regions, creating subsurface ice layers that persist through summer warming cycles and gradually expand their geographic coverage. The frozen ground alters subsurface hydrology by creating impermeable barriers that force groundwater flow into shallow zones, where it becomes more susceptible to seasonal freezing. These hydrological changes affect the river's base flow characteristics, reducing the groundwater contributions that maintain flow during dry seasons and creating more extreme variations between wet and dry periods. The river's chemistry changes as extended ice coverage reduces the rate of chemical weathering processes that supply dissolved minerals to the flowing water. Slower weathering rates decrease the concentrations of major ions while altering the relative proportions of different chemical species dissolved in the water. These chemical changes create new selective pressures for aquatic microbial communities that must adapt to modified nutrient availability and altered ionic strength conditions. Only took about 10 million years for global temperatures to drop sufficiently to trigger the initial stages of the snowball Earth transition, a rapid change in geological terms, but gradual enough for the river system to adapt through incremental modifications to its flow patterns and biological communities. The cooling operates according to positive feedback mechanisms that accelerate once critical thresholds are crossed. Increased ice coverage reflects more solar radiation, which promotes further cooling and additional ice formation. Albedo feedback mechanisms begin to dominate climate regulation as expanding ice coverage reflects increasing percentages of incoming solar radiation back to space without absorption. The river system participates in these feedback processes through its role in heat transport and moisture distribution, though its capacity for climate moderation diminishes as flow volumes decrease and ice coverage expands. The water that once moderated temperature extremes across continental distances becomes locked in ice for increasingly long periods. Biological productivity declines throughout the river system as cooling temperatures and reduced nutrient inputs limit the growth rates of primary producers. Cyanobacterial mats that once flourished in the river's warm, nutrient-rich waters become dormant during extended cold periods, their photosynthetic activity reduced to levels barely sufficient for survival. These biological changes affect water chemistry through reduced oxygen production and altered nutrient cycling patterns. The river's sedimentary deposits begin to record the approaching climatic transition through changes in grain size distribution, mineralogy, and organic content that reflect altered weathering and transport processes. Glacial flour from expanding ice sheets appears in the sedimentary load as fine-grained rock particles ground to powder by glacial abrasion. These distinctive sediments create marker horizons that document the geographic expansion of ice coverage across Rodinia's surface. Atmospheric CO2 concentrations decline through enhanced weathering processes that consume carbon dioxide while temperatures remain warm enough to sustain chemical reactions. The river system participates in this carbon drawdown through its role in transporting dissolved bicarbonate to oceanic sinks, where carbon becomes permanently sequestered in marine sediments. This carbon removal reduces the atmospheric greenhouse effect that has maintained warm global temperatures throughout the Proterozoic era. Scientists studying ancient ice age cycles find evidence of the approaching snowball Earth events preserved in sedimentary sequences that record the gradual transition from warm to cold climate conditions. Dropstones from icebergs appear in marine sediments as continental ice sheets reach the ocean margins, while tillites preserve direct evidence of glacial erosion and deposition processes. The river system's deposits contribute to this record through their documentation of changing terrestrial conditions during the climate transition. The mystery of snowball Earth initiation involves complex interactions between atmospheric composition, ocean circulation, and continental configuration that remain incompletely understood despite decades of research. The river system provides crucial evidence for understanding these interactions through its record of terrestrial environmental changes that preceded and accompanied global glaciation events. The transition appears to involve threshold effects, where gradual changes in forcing mechanisms trigger rapid shifts to alternative climate states. Ocean circulation patterns begin to reorganize as cooling surface waters create new density gradients that alter thermohaline circulation. The river system's discharge to Moravia carries increasingly cold fresh water that stratifies the ocean surface and reduces deep water formation rates. These oceanographic changes affect global heat transport and accelerate the cooling trend through reduced meridional heat exchange between equatorial and polar regions. Vegetation communities that existed in Rodinia's more temperate regions begin to retreat toward lower latitudes as expanding cold zones exceed the tolerance limits of early land plants. The river system loses the stabilizing influence of riparian vegetation as plant communities become restricted to increasingly narrow refugia near the equator. This biological retreat reduces the efficiency of soil formation and increases erosion rates in formerly vegetated areas. As seasonal ice coverage expands its duration and geographic extent, the river system develops new flow patterns characterized by extreme seasonal variations and prolonged periods of near-zero discharge. Spring flood events become more dramatic as accumulated ice and snow melt rapidly during brief warming periods, creating massive sediment transport episodes followed by months of minimal flow. These extreme flow variations create unique depositional environments that preserve high-resolution records of seasonal climate variations. The approaching ice age creates opportunities for evolutionary innovation among cold-adapted organisms that develop physiological mechanisms for surviving extended freezing conditions. Psychrophilic bacteria evolve anti-freeze proteins and cold shock responses that allow continued metabolic activity at temperatures that would prove fatal to mesophilic species. These cold adaptations will prove crucial for life survival during the extreme conditions that characterize full snowball Earth episodes. Atmospheric moisture content decreases as lower temperatures reduce evaporation rates from oceanic and terrestrial surfaces, creating increasingly arid conditions across much of Rodinia's interior. The river system experiences reduced precipitation inputs, while increased sublimation rates from ice and snow surfaces remove additional moisture from the atmospheric reservoir. These changes create a self-reinforcing cycle where reduced atmospheric moisture leads to less precipitation and further drying. The ancient river flows onward through landscapes increasingly dominated by ice and cold, its waters carrying the chemical and biological signatures of a world preparing for one of the most extreme climate episodes in Earth's history. The approaching winter will test the limits of life's adaptability and create conditions that challenge the very existence of liquid water on the planet's surface. Yet the river continues its patient work of erosion and transport, maintaining the essential processes that connect highlands to ocean basins even as the world prepares for transformation. The ancient river network reaches its greatest extent during this period of climatic transition, spreading across Rodinia's interior like the circulatory system of a continent-sized organism. Tributary systems extend their reach into highland regions where enhanced precipitation from the still active monsoon patterns feeds an expanding network of channels that drain watersheds spanning millions of square kilometers. The river system achieves a complexity and scale that will never again be matched on Earth's surface, its dendritic pattern resembling a vast tree whose branches reach into every valley and depression across the supercontinent's face. Major tributary systems develop their own distinctive characteristics as they drain different geological provinces and climate zones across Rodinia's vast expanse. Northern tributaries carry glacial meltwater and rock flour from expanding ice sheets, their chemistry dominated by mechanically weathered sediments ground to fine powder by glacial abrasion. Southern tributaries maintain the chemical signatures of tropical weathering, their waters rich in dissolved minerals released by intense chemical breakdown of bedrock under warm, humid conditions that still prevail near the equatorial margins. The river's main stem grows broader and deeper as it accommodates the increased discharge from this expanded tributary network, carving channels that rival small seas in their dimensions. Flow velocities decrease in these enlarged channels, creating conditions that favor fine sediment deposition and the development of extensive wetland systems along the river's margins. These riparian wetlands support diverse microbial communities that process nutrients and modify water chemistry through biological filtration and transformation processes. Confluence zones, where major tributaries join the main stem, create unique environments characterized by complex mixing patterns and chemical gradients. Waters with different temperatures, mineral contents, and pH levels interact in turbulent mixing zones that generate localized upwelling and circulation patterns. These confluence environments become centers of biological activity where different microbial communities encounter new chemical conditions and compete for available resources. The expanded river network creates its own regional climate through enhanced evaporation and heat transport that moderates temperature extremes across broad areas of Rodinia's interior. The vast surface area of flowing water acts as a thermal reservoir that absorbs heat during warm periods and releases it gradually during cooler intervals. This climatic moderation creates riparian corridors where biological activity remains high, despite the cooling trends affecting surrounding landscapes. Only took about 5 million years for the river system to achieve this maximum extent through the gradual integration of formerly isolated drainage basins and the expansion of tributary networks into previously arid regions. The growth operates through positive feedback mechanisms, where increased flow attracts additional tributaries, which further increase discharge and enhance the system's capacity for channel expansion and network development. The river becomes a self-organizing system that maximizes its drainage efficiency across available terrain. Sediment transport reaches unprecedented scales as the massive river system moves material from highland source regions to depositional basins across continental distances. The total sediment flux approaches levels that will not be equaled until human industrial activity begins to accelerate erosion rates in the distant future. This enhanced sediment transport creates thick alluvial deposits that bury previous topography and fundamentally alter the landscape's surface morphology. The river system's vast scale creates opportunities for long-distance biological dispersal as organisms travel hundreds or thousands of kilometers within the flowing water. Microbial communities distributed across the network maintain genetic connectivity through this hydrological transport system, preventing the isolation and divergence that would otherwise occur across such vast geographic distances. The river becomes a biological highway that facilitates gene flow and evolutionary innovation across continental scales. Water residence times within the expanded river system reach values measured in years rather than months, as water travels from the most distant headwaters to the ocean outlets. These extended residence times allow complex chemical reactions to proceed to completion, creating water compositions that differ substantially from the rapid transit chemistry typical of smaller river systems. The extended contact time between water and sediment creates unique geochemical environments that support specialized microbial metabolisms. Hydraulic complexity increases dramatically as the river network develops multiple parallel channels, anastomosing reaches, and seasonal overflow connections that create intricate flow patterns. During high flow periods, water spreads across vast floodplains through distributary systems that rival oceanic deltas in their complexity. These hydraulic patterns create diverse habitats ranging from fast-flowing main channels to slow-moving backwaters and seasonal wetlands. Scientists studying ancient river systems find evidence of this maximum network extent preserved in sedimentary formations that record the geographic distribution of river-transported materials across entire continents. Detrital mineral assemblages show the mixing of source materials from regions thousands of kilometers apart, while paleocurrent indicators document flow directions across the full extent of the ancient drainage basin. The geological record preserves the footprint of this continental-scale river system in rocks that span multiple modern continents. The mystery of river network optimization puzzles researchers who study the principles that govern drainage system evolution and efficiency. The ancient river appears to have achieved an optimal configuration that maximized drainage efficiency while minimizing energy expenditure. Yet the mechanisms responsible for this optimization remain poorly understood. The solution may involve self-organizing properties of flowing water that automatically adjust network geometry to achieve maximum entropy production. Channel morphology varies systematically across the river network as different reaches adapt to local flow conditions, sediment loads, and substrate characteristics. Bedrock channels dominate in highland regions where high flow velocities prevent significant sediment accumulation, while alluvial channels develop elaborate meandering patterns in lowland areas where fine sediment accumulation creates erodible banks that adjust continuously to changing flow conditions. The vast river system creates unique opportunities for paleoclimatic reconstruction through its integration of climatic signals from diverse source regions across Rodinia's interior. Seasonal variations in tributary contributions create complex chemical mixing patterns that preserve information about precipitation timing, temperature variations, and atmospheric circulation patterns across the entire drainage basin. The river becomes a continental-scale climate monitoring system that records environmental conditions with unprecedented spatial and temporal resolution. Biological productivity reaches maximum levels throughout the river network as optimal flow conditions and enhanced nutrient transport support flourishing microbial communities. Stromatolite formation accelerates in favorable environments where steady flow provides optimal conditions for bacterial growth and sediment trapping. These biological features create positive feedback effects that enhance the river's capacity for chemical processing and ecosystem development. As the river system approaches its maximum development, it begins to show the first subtle signs of the reorganization that will accompany Rodinia's eventual breakup. Minor changes in tributary drainage patterns reflect the early stages of thermal uplift and structural modification that will eventually fragment the supercontinent. These changes operate too slowly to affect the river's basic function, but create detectable modifications in flow patterns and sediment transport pathways. The ancient river system represents the culmination of hundreds of millions of years of continental assembly and landscape evolution, achieving a scale and complexity that reflects the unique geographic configuration of the Rodinia supercontinent. Its vast network integrates the hydrological, chemical, and biological processes operating across an entire continental landmass, creating a unified system that functions as the circulatory system of a planet-sized organism. The river flows onward through this moment of maximum development, carrying within its waters the integrated signature of a continental ecosystem operating at scales that exceed anything the fragmented Earth will later experience. The breaking of all things begins with forces so subtle that the ancient river system continues its westward flow for millions of years before recognizing that the very foundations of its world have shifted beneath its channels. Rodinia's final breakup accelerates as mantle plumes reach the surface and begin the systematic dismantlement of the supercontinent that has provided the river's drainage basin for hundreds of millions of years. New ocean basins open along rift zones that slice through the heart of the continental landmass, redirecting drainage patterns and fragmenting the vast river network into isolated segments that will never again connect across continental distances. The Iapetus Ocean widens as sea floor. Spreading accelerates along the mid-ocean ridge system, creating new oceanic crust at rates that dwarf the slow spreading that characterize the early stages of continental breakup. The expanding ocean basin captures increasing portions of the river system's flow, as eastern tributaries find shorter paths to the new sea level. Ancient drainage divides shift and collapse as thermal uplift associated with rifting alters the topographic framework that has controlled water flow across Rodinia's interior. Volcanic activity intensifies along active rift zones as ascending mantle plumes generate massive outpourings of basaltic lava that dam river channels and redirect flow patterns. Some volcanic episodes create temporary lakes hundreds of kilometers long as lava flows block major valleys and force water to find alternative outlets. These volcanic barriers persist for thousands of years before being breached by accumulated water pressure, creating catastrophic flood events that carve new gorges through fresh volcanic rocks. The river system responds to continental fragmentation with the adaptive resilience that characterizes all flowing water, finding new paths when established routes become blocked, and adjusting flow patterns to accommodate radically altered topography. Some portions of the ancient network maintain their westward orientation toward Moravia's shores, while others redirect eastward toward the opening Iapetus Ocean. The river demonstrates the fundamental property of water to seek the lowest available outlet regardless of the geological upheavals that modify the landscape. Rift valley systems develop their own internal drainage patterns as subsidence creates closed basins between elevated rift shoulders. The river system feeds these interior basins through tributary networks that develop along fault-controlled valleys, creating temporary lakes that fluctuate in size and chemistry as climatic and tectonic forces compete for control over water balance. These rift lakes become centers of unique ecological development where isolated biological communities evolve in response to novel environmental conditions. Only took about 30 million years for the accelerating breakup to fundamentally alter the river system's basic architecture, transforming a unified continental drainage network into a collection of separate river systems draining fragments of the former supercontinent. The fragmentation operates through positive feedback mechanisms where initial rifting creates new base levels that capture drainage and accelerate erosion, which in turn promotes further structural weakness and continued rifting. New mountain ranges rise along continental margins as rifting progresses and new ocean basins develop their own spreading centers and transform fault systems. These emerging highlands create fresh sources of sediment and alter precipitation patterns through orographic effects that redirect atmospheric moisture transport. The river system incorporates these new sediment sources while adapting to modified climate patterns that reflect changing continental configurations. Transform fault systems develop along some rift zones, where oblique extension creates lateral motion between continental fragments. These strike-slip fault systems disrupt established drainage patterns by laterally displacing river channels and creating offset valleys that require stream capture events to re-establish flow continuity. The river system demonstrates remarkable ability to reorganize across these structural discontinuities through the development of new confluence patterns and channel networks. The chemistry of the fragmenting river system changes as different portions begin to drain distinct geological provinces with contrasting mineral assemblages and weathering characteristics. Waters that formerly mixed in the unified river network now follow separate paths to different ocean basins, creating distinct chemical signatures that reflect the geological diversity of the separating continental fragments. These chemical changes drive biological diversification as microbial communities adapt to modified nutrient availability and altered ionic compositions. Paleomagnetic signatures preserved in the river's sedimentary deposits document the complex motions of continental fragments as they separate and drift toward their future positions in the fragmenting supercontinent. Magnetic declination patterns show the progressive rotation of different crustal blocks as they respond to changing stress fields associated with rifting and seafloor spreading. The river system unknowingly records these motions through the magnetic alignment of sedimentary particles during deposition. Scientists studying continental breakup processes find evidence of this fragmentation preserved in sedimentary formations that record the timing and geometry of rift development across ancient supercontinents. Facies changes in river deposits document the transition from unified continental drainage to separate basin systems, while provenance studies track the progressive isolation of sediment source regions as continental fragments separate. The river system provides a high-resolution record of continental breakup processes operating over tens of millions of years. The mystery of supercontinent breakup timing involves complex interactions between mantle convection patterns, continental thermal structure, and surface processes that remain incompletely understood despite extensive research. The river system offers crucial insights into surface responses to deep earth processes through its record of drainage reorganization and landscape evolution during continental fragmentation. The breakup appears to involve threshold effects, where gradual thermal weakening triggers rapid mechanical failure and rift propagation. Biological communities within the river system experience progressive isolation as continental fragmentation separates formerly connected populations into distinct biogeographic provinces. Genetic isolation leads to evolutionary divergence as different river segments develop unique environmental conditions that select for different physiological adaptations and metabolic strategies. The continental breakup inadvertently conducts a vast experiment in biological evolution and speciation across multiple isolated ecosystems. As new ocean basins develop and mature, they begin to influence global climate patterns through their effects on atmospheric and oceanic circulation. The river system experiences changing precipitation patterns and temperature regimes as continental configurations alter the pathways for heat and moisture transport across planetary distances. These climate changes affect river flow patterns and create new selective pressures for biological communities throughout the drainage network. Sediment routing systems undergo fundamental reorganization as continental breakup redirects the pathways connecting source regions to depositional basins. Sediments that formerly traveled thousands of kilometers within the unified river system now reach the ocean after much shorter transport distances, creating new delta systems and continental margin deposits. The efficiency of sediment transport decreases as longer pathways become unavailable, leading to increased storage within continental interior basins. The ancient river system maintains its essential function of connecting highlands to ocean basins despite the dramatic geological reorganization that fragments its drainage network. Water continues to follow gravitational gradients toward the sea, though the pathways become increasingly complex as continental breakup creates new topographic barriers and alternative outlets. The river demonstrates the fundamental persistence of hydrological processes even during periods of extreme geological upheaval. Thermal effects associated with continental rifting create localized climate anomalies that influence river flow patterns and biological productivity across the fragmenting landscape. Enhanced heat flow from ascending mantle plumes creates thermal domes that generate their own weather patterns, while volcanic emissions alter atmospheric composition on regional scales. The river system integrates these thermal effects through modified chemistry and altered seasonal flow patterns. As Rodinia's fragments drift toward their future positions in the reconfigured global geography, the ancient river system completes its transformation from a unified continental network to a collection of separate drainage systems that will never again connect across such vast distances. The breakup represents the end of an era in Earth's hydrological history, marking the transition from supercontinent-scale river systems to the smaller, more isolated networks that will characterize the fragmented world to come. Today's scattered continents still hold fragments of the ancient river's deposits, preserved in formations that span the globe like pieces of a vast geological puzzle waiting for patient scientists to recognize their common origin. The belt supergroup of Montana and Idaho contains sandstones and shales that remember when water flowed across terrain that has since drifted thousands of kilometers from its original position. Similar sedimentary sequences in Australia's Kimberley region preserve complementary records of the same river system, their matching characteristics revealing the former unity of land masses now separated by entire ocean basins. Detrital zircon grains found in these widely scattered formations carry within their crystal lattices the uranium lead age signatures that point to common source regions in the ancient Grenville province. These microscopic time capsules survive the complete erosion of their parent rocks, transport across continental distances, deposition in ancient river systems, and subsequent burial and uplift cycles that span nearly 1 billion years of geological history. Each zircon crystal becomes a witness to the river's existence, carrying chemical fingerprints that allow modern researchers to reconstruct the drainage patterns of a world that predates complex life by hundreds of millions of years. Cross-bedded sandstones in formations from Scotland to South Africa show paleocurrent directions that consistently point westward when the continental fragments are restored to their Rodinia configuration. These flow indicators preserve the river's persistent orientation toward the ancient Moravia Ocean, their orientations remaining faithful to the hydraulic gradients that controlled water flow across the supercontinent's interior. The stone remembers the direction of flowing water with greater fidelity than human memory, preserves events from decades past. Stromatolite formations in the Helena Formation of Montana match similar structures found in correlative units across multiple continents, their distinctive layered architectures recording the seasonal rhythms and chemical conditions that characterized the ancient river system. These bacterial monuments preserve evidence of the microbial communities that flourished in the river's margins, their growth patterns encoding information about water chemistry, seasonal variations, and biological productivity during Earth's Middle Age. The stromatolites become libraries written in stone, their pages recording environmental conditions that existed when the planet looked like an alien world. Paleosol horizons developed on ancient floodplains preserve chemical signatures of atmospheric composition and weathering intensity that characterize the Proterozoic era. These fossil soils show evidence of the iron-rich chemistry and elevated carbon dioxide levels that distinguish the ancient atmosphere from modern conditions. Chemical alteration patterns in the paleosols document weathering processes that operated under atmospheric conditions that will never again exist on Earth's surface, creating chemical fossils of an extinct planetary environment. Only took about 50 million years for the river's deposits to accumulate to thicknesses measured in kilometers, creating sedimentary packages that now provide some of the most complete records of Proterozoic environmental conditions available anywhere on Earth. The sedimentary sequences preserve high-resolution records of climate variations, biological evolution, and atmospheric changes that span one of the most important transitional periods in planetary history. These rock archives contain more information about ancient Earth than any library built by human hands. Heavy mineral assemblages in the ancient river deposits reflect the distinctive geological signatures of Rodinia's assembly from diverse crustal fragments formed during different periods of Earth's early history. Garnet grains carry pressure-temperature information that documents the depths and conditions of ancient mountain-building events, while tourmaline crystals preserve boron isotope signatures that reflect the involvement of seawater in metamorphic processes. These mineral assemblages create geological fingerprints that allow researchers to trace sediment transport pathways across the fragmented remains of the ancient supercontinent. Magnetic inclination and declination data preserved in the river's sedimentary deposits provide crucial constraints for reconstructing Rodinia's position and motion through deep time. Paleomagnetic vectors, frozen in iron-bearing minerals, document the supercontinent's drift across Earth's surface and its rotation as different margins faced toward and away from the magnetic poles. These magnetic archives preserve information about planetary magnetic field behavior during an era when core dynamics operated under conditions that differed substantially from modern patterns. Geochemical studies of the ancient river deposits reveal systematic variations in trace element compositions that reflect changing provenance patterns as Rodinia assembled and eventually began its breakup sequence. Rare earth element signatures track the unroofing of different source terrains through progressive erosion, while hafnium isotope ratios in detrital zircons document the evolution of continental crust composition over hundreds of millions of years. The river system becomes an unwitting geochemical sampling device that systematically documented the chemical evolution of early continental crust. Scientists studying these scattered remnants of the ancient river system must work like detectives, piecing together evidence from formations distributed across multiple continents to reconstruct the original drainage network and flow patterns. Advances in analytical techniques continue to reveal new information about the river's characteristics and behavior, with each technological innovation providing fresh insights into conditions that existed during one of Earth's most enigmatic periods. The stones yield their secrets reluctantly, requiring increasingly sophisticated interrogation methods to extract their ancient memories. The mystery of correlating sedimentary formations across continental distances challenges researchers who must distinguish between deposits formed by the same ancient river system and those created by separate but contemporaneous drainage networks. The solutions require careful integration of multiple lines of evidence, including age dating, paleomagnetic analysis, provenance studies, and paleoenvironmental reconstruction. Success in these correlations provides crucial tests of supercontinent reconstruction models and understanding of ancient Earth system behavior. Metamorphic overprinting has altered many of the river's deposits, transforming original sedimentary minerals into new phases that reflect subsequent burial heating and deformation. These metamorphic changes complicate the interpretation of primary depositional characteristics while also providing information about the geological history that affected the deposits after their formation. Researchers must carefully separate primary signatures from secondary overprints to extract information about original river system characteristics. Tectonic disruption has scattered the river's deposits across multiple continents through the plate motions associated with supercontinent breakup and subsequent continental drift. Former contiguous sedimentary sequences now appear as isolated formations separated by ocean basins, their original spatial relationships obscured by hundreds of millions of years of continental wandering. Restoring these formations to their original positions requires detailed understanding of plate tectonic motions and continental drift pathways. The ancient river's deposits provide some of the best available evidence for understanding Earth system behavior during the Proterozoic era, when atmospheric composition, climate patterns, and biological evolution differed dramatically from later periods. These sedimentary archives document the transition from a world dominated by simple life forms to one preparing for the biological innovations that would lead to complex multicellularity. The river system witnessed and recorded one of the most important chapters in Earth's environmental history. Modern analytical techniques continue to extract new information from the ancient river deposits, with each methodological advance revealing previously hidden aspects of Proterozoic environmental conditions. Micro-scale chemical analysis reveals information about individual depositional events, while isotopic studies document atmospheric and oceanic chemistry with unprecedented precision. The deposits serve as natural laboratories for testing models of ancient Earth system behavior and planetary evolution processes. As researchers continue to study these scattered fragments of the ancient river system, they gradually reconstruct a picture of a world that operated according to physical and chemical principles that remain universal while supporting environmental conditions that seem almost alien from a modern perspective. The river's deposits preserve the memory of a planet in transition, documenting the gradual evolution from Earth's youth toward the conditions that would eventually support the complex ecosystems that characterize more recent geological periods. The ancient river's story begins its slow dissolution into geological stillness as the forces that sustained its continental scale flow for hundreds of millions of years gradually yield to the inexorable processes that transform all flowing things into memory preserved in stone. The final chapters of the river's existence unfold not through sudden catastrophe, but through the patient accumulation of changes that redirect its waters toward new destinations and alter the fundamental relationships between highland sources and oceanic sinks that defined its character for so long. Continental fragmentation reaches completion as the last connections between Rodinia's separating pieces finally sever, creating isolated landmasses that drift apart across expanding ocean basins. The river system that once unified drainage across an entire supercontinent fragments into separate networks that will never again share waters or exchange sediments across such vast distances. Each continental piece carries with it portions of the ancient drainage network, preserved like fossils of a planetary circulatory system that once connected all lands into a single hydrological entity. The western tributaries that formerly fed the main river system find new outlets as the expanding Iapetus Ocean captures their flow through newly formed valleys that offer shorter paths to sea level. These redirected waters carve fresh channels through landscapes that have never known flowing water, their erosive power focused on rock formations that accumulated during the river's millions of years of deposition. The ancient becomes the foundation for the new, as former river deposits transform into the bedrock that guides future drainage development. Tectonic forces continue their patient work of landscape modification as fault systems associated with continental breakup create new topographic features that alter the hydraulic gradients controlling water flow. Mountain ranges rise along some continental margins as compressive forces accompanying rifting elevate crustal blocks to heights that generate their own precipitation patterns. The river system responds to these changes by developing new tributary networks that drain the emerging highlands while abandoning former channels that no longer connect to active source regions. Climate patterns shift as the fragmenting continents assume new positions relative to atmospheric and oceanic circulation systems. The monsoon patterns that sustained the river's flow for geological ages weaken and disappear as the thermal contrasts between continental interior and oceanic margins diminish with changing geography. Precipitation patterns reorganize around smaller continental fragments, creating regional climate systems that lack the continental scale coherence that characterized Rodinia's atmospheric circulation. Only took about 20 million years for the final fragmentation to redirect the last remnants of the ancient river system into separate drainage basins that bear little resemblance to the unified network that once spanned a supercontinent. The transformation operates through the same hydraulic principles that governed the river's original development, but applied to a fundamentally altered geographical framework that favors smaller, more localized drainage systems over continental-scale integration. The river's chemical signature disperses into multiple isolated systems as different fragments of the former drainage network begin to reflect the distinctive geological and climatic characteristics of their new continental settings. Waters that once mixed in the unified river system now follow separate evolutionary pathways, developing unique chemical compositions that reflect local weathering processes and atmospheric interactions. The chemical unity that characterized the ancient river dissolves into the diversity that defines separate drainage systems. Biological communities within the fragmenting river system experience progressive isolation as continental drift eliminates the hydrological connections that formerly allowed genetic exchange across vast distances. Microbial populations that once shared genes through water transport begin to diverge evolutionarily as they adapt to the changing environmental conditions that characterize their isolated habitats. The biological unity of the ancient river system gives way to the diversity that accompanies geographic separation and environmental specialization. Sedimentary deposition patterns change dramatically as the shortened flow paths associated with continental fragmentation alter the distances and timescales involved in sediment transport. Materials that formerly traveled thousands of kilometers within the unified river system now reach the ocean after much shorter journeys, creating new depositional environments and reducing the opportunity for the extensive chemical and physical processing that characterized the ancient system. The efficiency of continental-scale sediment recycling decreases as the pathways for long-distance transport disappear. The river's memory becomes encoded in the sedimentary formations that preserve its deposits across the scattered continental fragments, creating a distributed archive that documents its existence through geological evidence rather than active flow. These sedimentary remnants maintain the chemical, physical, and biological signatures that characterize the ancient system, allowing future investigators to reconstruct its behavior and environmental significance through careful analysis of the stone record it created. Scientists studying the transition from unified to fragmented drainage systems find evidence of this transformation preserved in sedimentary sequences that document the timing and mechanisms of river system reorganization during continental breakup. Changes in paleo-current directions, sediment provenance patterns, and depositional environments record the progressive disruption of continental-scale drainage integration. The geological record preserves the death certificate of the ancient river system in the same formations that document its life and growth. The mystery of river system persistence during extreme geological upheaval provides insights into the resilience and adaptability of surface processes operating on planetary scales. The ancient river demonstrated remarkable ability to maintain its essential functions while accommodating fundamental changes in its geological and climatic framework, suggesting that hydrological systems possess self-organizing properties that promote stability within change. These characteristics may prove relevant for understanding how Earth's surface systems will respond to future environmental changes. Thermal effects associated with continental rifting begin to diminish as mantle plumes exhaust their thermal energy, and the active phases of continental breakup give way to the passive margin development that characterizes mature ocean basins. The enhanced heat flow that drove accelerated chemical weathering and biological productivity during the breakup period gradually returns to background levels, reducing the intensity of surface processes that depend on elevated thermal gradients. As the fragments of Rodinia assume their new positions in the evolving global geography, the remnants of the ancient river system adapt to new roles in smaller-scale hydrological networks that serve individual continental landmasses rather than unified supercontinental drainage. The water continues to follow gravitational gradients toward the sea, but the pathways become shorter and more direct as continental configurations favor efficiency over the vast integrative capacity that characterized the supercontinent period. The ancient river's dissolution represents more than the end of a particular hydrological system. It marks the conclusion of an era in Earth's environmental history when continental-scale integration created opportunities for planetary-scale processes that will not recur until human activities begin to operate on global scales in the distant future. The river system achieved a level of geographical and environmental integration that demonstrates the potential for surface processes to create unified planetary systems when appropriate geological conditions allow their development. The transformation from active river system to geological memory proceeds with the same patience that characterized the river's original development, requiring millions of years for the final traces of flowing water to disappear from the landscapes that once channeled continental-scale drainage. The process operates through the accumulation of incremental changes rather than dramatic events, reflecting the fundamental character of geological time where transformation occurs through persistence rather than sudden revolution. The sleep of deep time begins to claim the ancient river as its waters find new paths through fragmenting landscapes. Its channels fill with sediment from sources that no longer connect to distant highland regions, and its biological communities adapt to isolation from the planetary scale circulation that once connected all flowing waters into a single vast system. The river's story enters the realm of stone memory, where flowing water becomes stratified rock and dynamic systems transform into static archives of planetary history. The ancient river's story settles now into the eternal stillness that claims all flowing things when time has worked its patient alchemy upon the restless waters of the world. Where once the rusty streams carried the dissolved memories of mountains across the vast face of Rodinia, only silence remains, the deep, mineral silence of sedimentary rock that holds within its crystalline structure the chemical signatures of a world that will never flow again. In the quiet spaces between sand grains, compressed by the weight of geological ages into stone that remembers motion, the river's essence persists in forms that transcend the temporary urgency of flowing water. Each quartz crystal, each fragment of feldspar, each microscopic zircon grain carries forward the atomic memory of its journey from highland source to oceanic destination, their molecular structures preserving information about temperatures, pressures, and chemical conditions that existed when Earth wore a different face beneath alien skies. The stromatolites built by ancient bacteria along the river's margins stand now as monuments in museum displays and road-cut exposures, their layered architectures speaking in the silent language of stone about seasonal rhythms that pulsed for millions of years across landscapes that knew no footprints save those left by wind and flowing water. These bacterial cathedrals outlasted the mountains that fed the river's flow, their builders' patience rewarded with a permanence that mocks the seeming solidity of continental crust. Time moves differently in the realm of stone memory, where millions of years compress into single sedimentary layers, and the violent history of planetary transformation appears as gentle transitions between rock formations. The river that once rushed toward ancient seas with the urgency of gravity and gradient now rests in perfect stillness, its energy dissipated into the thermal background of a cooling planet, its motion transformed into the static testimony of geological archives. The magnetic minerals that once aligned themselves with Earth's field during their transport in the ancient river's flow maintain their orientations still. Frozen compasses pointing toward magnetic poles that wandered across the planet's surface as continents drifted through configurations that will never repeat. These microscopic needles preserve directions toward destinations that no longer exist, their loyalty to vanished field geometries creating navigation charts for a world that dissolved into geological memory before complex life learned to dream of maps. In the deepest quiet of sedimentary formations, where pressure and time have worked their slow metamorphosis upon the river's deposits, new minerals grow in patterns that echo the original flow directions of waters that ceased their journey hundreds of millions of years ago. Mica crystals align themselves parallel to ancient current directions, while elongated quartz grains stretch in orientations that remember the hydraulic forces that shaped their transport across a supercontinent that assembled and dispersed according to the vast patience of mantle convection. The sleep that claims the ancient river extends beyond the boundaries of individual systems to encompass the entire category of continental-scale drainage integration, as Earth's fragmented geography no longer supports the formation of river networks that span entire supercontinents. The conditions that allowed such vast hydrological unification exist now only in the static memory of rock formations that preserve evidence of planetary-scale processes operating under geographical constraints that the modern world cannot provide. All waters eventually find their rest in stone, whether through the direct precipitation of evaporate deposits or the gradual transformation of sedimentary archives through burial metamorphism and tectonic recycling. The ancient river achieved this final transformation with the same patience that characterized its flow, yielding its liquid identity to the mineral stability that offers permanence beyond the reach of seasonal variation and climatic change. The wind that once drove monsoon moisture across Rodinia's interior now encounters only the scattered fragments of former unity. Its circulation patterns adapted to smaller continental configurations that lack the thermal mass necessary to sustain atmospheric circulation on the scale that once fed the ancient river's continental spanning network. Even the air remembers differently now. Its pressure waves and temperature gradients organized around geographical realities that favor regional over planetary scale integration. In this deepest quiet, where geological time stretches toward infinity and the urgency of flowing water dissolves into the patient persistence of mineral crystal, the ancient river finds its final peace. Its story becomes one with the stone that holds all stories, its journey complete in the transformation from motion to memory, from process to archive, from the temporary turbulence of liquid water seeking the sea to the eternal stillness of rock that has found its rest in the gravity-bound stability of the planetary interior. The ancient river sleeps, now the sleep of deep time, where all flowing things eventually find refuge from the restless energy that drives surface processes toward the entropy of thermal equilibrium. In this realm of mineral dreams, motion transforms into structure, process becomes pattern, and the ancient urgency of water seeking its level resolves into the geometric perfection of crystal lattices that will endure until the sun exhausts its nuclear fuel and Earth's surface finally achieves the temperature equilibrium that marks the end of all dynamic systems.